Your bow can be perfectly tuned, but that does not mean that it is forgiving. Perfect arrow flight does not mean a forgiving bow, especially under pressure. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 ways to make your bow more forgiving so that the bow is working with you, not against you. This first one is to fix left and right misses that feel random and unexplainable. This is perhaps the easiest one to do because you don't need any special tools, you don't need a bow press, you just need an Allen wrench and the ability to shoot your bow. Now, if you're going to do this, I'm going to just assume that you already have your bow tuned. We don't want to change the tune of your bow if we can at all help it. If your bow isn't already shooting a clean bullet hole, fix that first and then come back to this. So the adjustment we have to make for this shouldn't throw off our tune at all. All it has to do with is moving our sight in or out of our riser or our rest forward and back from our riser. In simple terms, we're making sure that our pin and our arrow move together if the bow is torqued. This is especially important if you're hunting in the cold, wearing gloves, or just struggle with a consistent grip to begin with. Now, personally, I prefer to only adjust the sight forward and back on this, as what I've found in the past is when I had a rest that I could adjust forward and back, when I made that adjustment, it also threw off my tune. By leaving my rest alone, I'm not adjusting my tune at all, just the position of the sight in or out of my riser. This is another reason why I prefer to run just an integrate QAD rest like this, where it's attached just on the back of the riser to cut weight and minimize any chance for movement. Now, many folks have been taught to move their sight here in or out based on your peep sight, or that you want to have your sight as far out as possible so that you can aim more precisely. Now, while this is technically true, it doesn't give your bow more forgiveness, especially under pressure. Let me show you how you can test this so you can determine what is best for you and your setup. Start with your sight all the way forward away from your riser and sight it in so that your arrows split a vertical line on your target evenly. It's best if you can do this at a range of 40 yards or over, but 20 is completely fine if you're tight on space. Once you have your left and right sighted in perfectly, you need to do something a bit unconventional. Once you come to full draw and you aim at the vertical line on the target, you will intentionally torque your bow to the right or to the left and execute your shot. What we're testing here is not accuracy. We're testing how the bow reacts when you make a mistake. In this case, if you're accidentally torquing your bow. We're not trying to break or derail your bow. This is controlled, intentional, and safe if done correctly. Now, when you do shoot with intentional torque into your bow, are the arrows still landing evenly on that vertical line on your target? With the sight all the way out, when I torqued it to the left, these arrows hit to the right. When I torqued it to the right, this arrow hit to the left. What that's telling us is that the position of our sight is either overcorrecting or undercorrecting for the amount that the arrow is coming out of the bow differently because of that torque. The goal with this is simple. When the bow twists in our hand at full draw, we just want the arrow still impacting right behind the pin. Yes, we can actually fix this so that when we do torque the bow, the amount the pin moves over is exactly where that arrow is going to land. Now, move your sight all the way in on the riser. Verify that it's still sighted in on that vertical plumb line when you're not torquing the bow. Make sure those arrows are impacting evenly. And try this test again. Are your arrows impacting closer to that plumb line than before when you're torquing it, or further? Chances are, if you're shooting a rest that is closer to the riser, like a QAD integrate, or most of the rests on the market for that matter, you'll find that those arrows are impacting much closer to that plumb line when you torque it. Do this test again, moving your sight slightly forward or slightly back towards the riser, and see where that position needs to be so the arrows land right behind your pin, right evenly on that vertical plumb line. With the sight moved in, closer to the riser, the 3 arrows that I shot, torquing left and right, all impacted in line with the string. What I've found over the years for most bow hunting setups is that if you're running a QAD style rest where the launcher is actually supporting that arrow near the throat of the grip, your sight actually needs to be all the way in close to your riser. That's why I prefer to not run a long dovetail setup and have all that extra weight on my bow. If this feels eye-opening, good. This can explain why some bows feel more forgiving than others, even with perfect arrow flight. Once you find the appropriate sight position forward and back and the appropriate rest position that you want if you adjusted that instead, then you need to adjust your peep sight so that it matches your sight housing depending on what it is that you prefer. If the first one fixes left and right misses, this one fixes high and low misses that happen when your shot execution is not perfect. This happens when you feel rushed or you feel like you're under a lot of pressure. This method falls on the same principles as the first. We want to minimize our inconsistencies, our vertical inconsistencies, through setup and tuning so that despite the inconsistencies in our shot, the arrows still land in the middle. Vertical misses that we can tune for are most commonly from how hard or how soft we are pulling against the back wall for our shot. It's common when we are nervous or shooting in wind that we pull a bit harder against our back wall. And what's important when we do that is that the average of our arrows is still impacting on that horizontal line and they're not impacting higher or lower because of that pressure difference as we aim and execute. So just like with your sight, once you have this set correctly, you can pull both very hard against your back wall or very soft against your back wall, and your arrows are still going to average on this horizontal line. To make this easy, simply sight in on a horizontal line at distance. Again, I'll say 40 yards or further is preferred, although 20 yards is fine if you're tight on space. Once the average of your arrows is impacting evenly on a horizontal line, try drawing back and pulling really hard against your back wall and shooting a group at that line. Then, shoot a group holding really soft against the back wall and execute. Now, as you did this, did your arrows impact higher or lower based on if you were pulling harder or softer against your back wall? If they did not impact higher or lower on the horizontal line, that's a good indicator that your cams are in sync. If they did, however, impact high or low on that horizontal line, that's a good indicator that one of our cams is over-rotated. Even if you don't plan to adjust this yourself, just understanding what is happening will help you diagnose your misses faster. Now this is the mechanical reason for what you just saw on target. First, check this in a draw board, draw it all the way back and back off so the stops are just barely off the cable. You should be able to slide a credit card between the cable or the mod stop on your cable on each the top and the bottom, and the gap should be exactly the same. If one stop is touching and the other stop has a gap between the cable, that is a direct indicator that your sync is not on. Now a half twist in the cable opposite of the gap, so there's a gap from this stop touching the cable on the top cam. If I put a half twist into this bottom cable, that should fix it depending on how many twists are already in your cables. For a finer adjustment, you can take the end loops on your Matthews match bowstrings and roll them to make a finer adjustment instead of doing a twist, which could be too much. Matthews intentionally does not serve their loops on their bowstrings because of this. Now, if you don't have that, but a half twist in your cable is too much, here's another quick tip on what you can do to make a finer adjustment. Take just a small piece of D-loop material, burn both ends of it so it doesn't fray, and just insert it in on the cable that effectively needs to be shortened to adjust the spacing and the timing on your cam. You will know you have this perfect when you can stay soft in your valley and execute and pull really hard against your back wall and execute, and the average of your arrows still impact that horizontal line evenly. If you had to make an adjustment here, it will slightly throw off your bow tune. Just know that it'll take a simple adjustment of moving your rest slightly up or slightly down to get your arrow back flying straight. Once this is right, vertical misses caused by pressure differences against your back wall will largely disappear. Now, if your bow still feels hard to hold and aim on target, the first two will not save you. That's where this last piece really comes into play. Aiming forgiveness is about one thing: how quickly your sight pin returns back to the middle and how long it stays there. If you can remember one thing about this entire section, this is it. Now, don't try to adjust everything at once. Listen first and adjust one variable at a time. These aren't three separate fixes. These are three parts of the same system: draw length, stabilizers and stabilizer weight, and holding weight. I'll dive into each of these briefly so that you can make this system work for you. Know that you must do all three of these together, as doing just one will not make this system work. First up, micro-tuning draw length. Yes, we want to get our draw length within the correct half-inch mod so that our draw length is in the right position. But you can even micro-adjust draw length down to 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch at a time, depending on how far you want to take it. To get this right, eliminate all the other variables that are going to affect this. Take your stabilizers off and any unnecessary weight like a quiver so that you don't have any of these other factors working against you. Draw back and just aim at a bullseye. What do you see? For general directions, if your pin movement is very fast, very jerky, this is a good indication that your draw length is a bit short. Now, on the flip side, if your pin movement is really slow, likes to dip low out of the bottom, you get an occasional high miss, this is a good indicator that your draw length is a bit too long. What you're watching for isn't overall steadiness, it's control of your pin float. Many professional archers will adjust this down even between 1/16 of an inch so that they can fine-tune their draw length to get the most out of their hold over weeks and months to get the best accuracy possible. Next is stabilizer position and weight. Generally speaking, your front stabilizer and the weight on this is to get rid of the horizontal pin movement of your sight. You want at least enough weight on there to remove that horizontal shake or that horizontal movement when you aim. The sidebar comes into play not fully as a counterbalance for your front stabilizer, but actually to give you a direction of how that grip sits in the bow so that you can be more consistent shot to shot. Note that the longer your stabilizers are, the less weight is needed on the end to have the same stabilizing effect. Additionally, the total amount of weight on your stabilizers and the overall bow weight can have a significant factor on how steady your bow holds and aims at full draw. If your bow is really heavy or you have a lot of overall weight, that bow will sit very solid for a very short amount of time before you get tired. On the flip side, if you run a very light amount of weight on your stabilizers, especially if they're really short or your overall bow weight is really light, that pin may never truly fully settle, and it could be easier to get blown off target because of wind or nerves. If this sounds complex, that's okay. The goal isn't zero movement. It's movement that quickly returns back to center so that your pin spends the most amount of time possible over exactly what you want to hit. This brings us to our last point, which is holding weight. Holding weight needs to be adjusted as you are adjusting the other two so that they work together as one complete system. Ultimately, we want all three of these things working together to maximize the amount of time that our pin is returning back to center. Holding weight doesn't fix your aim, it supports it. Too heavy of a bow, too long of a draw length, too light of a holding weight, and that pin movement is slow and long but never really settles over the middle. However, if our overall bow weight is too light, our holding weight is extremely high, our draw length is too short, our pin movement is going to be extremely fast and jerky, it's never going to settle over the middle, and we'll never get it calmed down as we go to execute our shot. A general rule of thumb here is if you run a light amount of weight on your stabilizers, you feel like your draw length is set up correctly, generally you're going to want to run mods at 85%, so you're holding less holding weight. Instead, if you prefer to run a bit more weight on your stabilizers, you feel like your draw length is perfect, you might prefer a higher holding weight like 80% mods, where the wind cannot as easily blow you off target. With holding weight, neither is better, it's just that one is better for how you shoot. All of these factors come together so that your pin is spending more time on what it is that you're aiming at rather than off of it. A perfect hold doesn't sit dead still on the middle. It is just returning back to the middle faster than we can even see it happen. Forgiveness isn't about buying a more forgiving bow. It's about removing penalties when your shot isn't perfect. When your bow is set up correctly, it works with you instead of against you, especially when the shot matters. In the next video, I'll break down how you can achieve a steadier hold so that you can get the most out of your setup. If you want a deeper step-by-step program on how to set up and tune your bow for arrow flight and forgiveness, check out our Ultimate Bow Build Masterclass linked in the description. As always, thank you for watching, and we will see you on the next one.